In this video, I'm going to draw this thing. We have our heroic character on an amazing epic journey, traveling with his, look, I'm not quite sure what this thing is yet. So this is going to be laid back, real time. I'm going to be creating this illustration in Photoshop, and I'm just going to share with you my process and thoughts along the way. However, with this particular episode of the Art Ritual, I want to do something different. I'm going to take this image, which is actually something that I thumbnailed many years ago, and I had a failed attempt to create a finished illustration from it. I think this topic of why some things either lose energy or momentum, just kind of don't work, is a super interesting idea. I really think the thumbnail for this image worked, and I was expecting it to go really well, but I kind of just ran into some trouble with it. I'm not quite sure why. That's a big part of what I'll be chatting about as I create this. Anyway, this should be a fun one. Hopefully you'll join me, and hopefully I'll end up with something good in the end, an image that actually works this time. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Mcburnie. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, you can check out my free quick start guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, developing your own simple, reliable line and color process and style. You'll get access to all of the brushes and Photoshop documents and tricks and tips that I use as I create the illustration in this guide. It's free, the link will be in the description, so go check that out if that's something you're interested in. All right, here we are in Photoshop. Tools for today are a Wacom Cintiq 24 Pro. I don't think it is the touch version. I'm just using a PC workstation, and I have no idea what version of Photoshop I am running. The brushes that I'm going to be using in Photoshop are actually very similar to the ones that are part of the Quick Start Guide. The goal here is just to limit the amount of silly Photoshop brushes we have. So I'll kind of show you that process here. But first, let's look at this image, and again, what actually kind of happened here. So one of the things that, again, I'm often talking about as well in courses is that I like to separate the ideation process, the thumbnail process, from the kind of actual production process. And this is mostly just to take the pressure off that creative process. I think it can be good to just ideate and come up with a whole bunch of cool ideas. And also it means that, you know, when I'm sitting down and, you know, maybe I have time and I feel like drawing, but I'm not quite sure what to draw, I have kind of a collection of things that I can kind of draw on, let's say. So again, that's a big part of what we've got going on here. I had a bunch of these thumbnails, and this is one here that, again, I kind of thought was going to work, and it just kind of didn't work out that well. This is one, and this is also one that I sort of have turned into an illustration, and I'll show you that in a minute. This one here is one that, again, I haven't really turned into anything yet, but it's very similar to an image that might have been part of the intro. Again, I forget whether or not I kind of show this one, but I have this image of the, you know, this kind of guy floating through the clouds. He's on this weird boat, and the engine is this kind of sort of organic weird engine. Anyway, so this is normally what I'm dealing with. I have these thumbnails, and this is an image that was created from, you know, this thumbnail here. Get this up so you can kind of see what happens there. And this is also another one here, right, where you can see, again, that's kind of what we're working with. So you can see that, you know, very closely I tend to follow these thumbnails in terms of what's there, and I really try and figure out and get most of it working. Now this is an interesting one because this one just kind of didn't really work out, and I thought it was kind of good, and probably a big part of what went wrong is something that I'm also always talking about in most of the courses and advice that I give, is the sort of development of secondary form. So here's kind of what happened to that image, and I just felt like it was kind of falling a bit flat. I felt the anatomy, I wasn't able to sort of bridge the gap between the thumbnail and these finished lines and really kind of make it work, let's say. So that's, you know, something that often happens. And, you know, sometimes if it's just a sketchy image and I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, like whatever, you know, it didn't turn out that well. But, you know, this one, I felt like, you know, look, it had a lot of potential, and I kind of had big hopes for this image, and it kind of didn't necessarily turn out that well. So, yeah, look, I think that often happens. So what I'm going to do is just ditch these lines, and I'm going to ditch whatever is there in this file, and I'm going to focus on creating a second construction drawing. So this is the thumbnail, and I'm going to do like a pencil pass. Let's say this, if you're inking or creating normal comic book art, this would be your sort of penciling phase, right? Where what I'm going to do is construct what's there. I'm going to build scaffolding for that secondary form so that hopefully this time when I create the lines, I've got a better sort of foundation there to work from. And again, this is exactly what I would recommend you do if this kind of thing happens. I'm using the most simple tool possible for creating, the pencils, which is just super basic round brush. But this is going to be all I need. So what I'm going to do here is look at constructing some of this character's anatomy and see if I can just do another pass on it here, right? See if I can think about where the torso is. Boom. And again, I'm going to do another pass on this in a minute, but really the first thing I want to do is just sort out the proportion, because I don't think I did it well enough in this first version. So I've got the opacity set to 40. I'm just painting with black on this line, and this means that I can kind of go over these lines a little bit and I get this build up. Right, so I want this character looking kind of at us. Boom. Here we go. That's roughly the kind of idea that I want. And again, I'll do a bit of flipping of this as well. Make sure we get there. So here again, he had this kind of long torso, and I don't really feel that was working. So think about where I have the head, right? Here we've got neck, we've got the spine coming down here, right? Well, and really I need to have the pelvis here. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I have a lot of figure construction tutorials that really talk about what I'm doing here, using a pretty sort of modified version of the Loomis method. And this is typically exactly how I will do things. So again, just roughing this in. And it'll be interesting to see, once this is all said and done, what this looks like in comparison to the other sort of stab at this that I took. So I'm going to do very similar things, right? It's going to look very similar, just hopefully it'll be a bit better kind of organized. So the other, sort of tool you can use in Photoshop to tweak that can be useful is just doing the lasso plus move around. Now this is not recommended from a learning perspective. I think it's better to just erase and treat it much more like you've just got an old school implement, no tweaking with warp or anything like that. I think that'll improve drawing in general. But yeah, if you're in a rush and you could sort of redraw it, then I think it can be a good idea. So we got this thing here. Boom. Let's see if we can get this shape working. Yeah, just rough all this stuff in. And again, I feel like, for me, I haven't been doing heaps of drawing lately. I've been writing comics, storyboarding, plotting. Last few weeks, I haven't been sort of in the saddle doing heaps of actual drawing. So often when that happens, yeah, it takes me a while to kind of warm up. So I'm going to be that's okay. If some of these drawings don't turn out that well, that's fine. It'll get better. And I'm kind of confident of that, hopefully. So yeah, good to get like an indication of where the hard point for the knee will be here, right? If we're trying to create some kind of fall off. Right, because that way I can kind of really think about where the folds are going to be. Well, again, this is not necessarily an anatomy lesson or a how to draw lesson. This is just me, right, showing you how I go about this stuff. There we go. Again, I'm going to try to draw as much of this anatomy as I can, because I think it'll help me in the long run. Now, interestingly here, we sort of have this situation where like this arm is, I think, kind of meant to be going away from us a little bit. Boom. Right, and then it's sort of going over here. And I think this is one of those areas where you got to really be careful what you kind of do and what you sort of hope for, because it can be really tricky to place situations where you have a character with interaction on another object. So I really want to make sure that I'm kind of placing this hand here, and that there is some chance that this hand could actually go up there. And it's often these little things that will really kind of throw me off, because I'm never quite sure, right, like how difficult or challenging that will be. But I really do think I need to have this going back. Boom. Right. Boom. Now this is all sort of covered up. We've got some masses here, right? Some cloak costuming. Boom. And then this cape going down here. Boom. So this what I'm doing here is a very particular type of drawing. Let's see. I kind of know what I need to do, and the reason I call it construction drawing is because it is about building, right? It's not about the finish. It's not about things looking good. It's just about me getting stuff in the right spot, thinking about structure. And so I'll often do multiple passes on this, and what I'll try and do is make sure I've got a version of the thumbnail that I can view up above. So again, always remember, like you can kind of look at the thumbnail. The thumbnail will have always like really interesting elements to it, right? Interesting elements that we kind of didn't necessarily think about. So again, I think we have like a scarf kind of thing here. And the other thing that's worth considering is that I still have this thing underneath. And what I'll do is probably try and get rid of that if possible pretty early on. So I might try and do that soon, is create this secondary version. Boom, boom, boom. That's going to give me the lines that I can use as construction here. Now again, I don't have heaps of time to do this, right? I'm really trying to create something. Boom. Something still pretty quick in terms of the speed. But I need to make sure in the beginning, and again, I don't know what this kind of creepy creature is, right? I have this idea of like, again, these kind of growths and weird things kind of growing down. right? It's like a mix of sort of something aquatic, and you know, you're just not quite sure what is going on there. And I think again that gives it a little bit of like an alien weird vibe, right? We've got like a bit of like a whale kind of look here. Boom, boom. So yeah, lots of details here that need to be resolved. That will be interesting to resolve. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom. So trying to think about the form, right? What's happening with the form? Yeah, but mostly I think this is succeeding on a shape level at the moment. Boom, 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 boom. So yeah, and again, sometimes it's like, I don't know where this idea came from, these kind of like weird creature design bits and pieces, these amorphous ideas of kind of like weird growths. And again, we will see. It could be that, you know, this is one of those things that just exists in idea space, right? And it's just really hard to get it to work. Who knows? But you can see here again, like I did a lot of work on this saddle, right? I really tried to make sure that, you know, it was going to work. Boom, boom. But yeah, I think there's often can be just awkward levels of finish, right? Where I think I put enough in there, but you know, it didn't actually end up being enough, and you know, that just causes much tension because there's specificity there, but not enough specificity for me to actually complete the drawing. Which means it's tricky to ad lib as you're creating like finished lines. Because you kind of have something that sort of is meant to be there. Boom, boom. Yeah, so again, sort of got something here. I think the idea here is this guy's tail. I think part of the problem also is really selling this idea of depth here, right? Of like where these rocks are. So I think one of the things I'm going to do is, yeah, try and not like copy what I had there before, because to a certain degree, I'm not entirely convinced it was working. So yeah, let's create still going to have some of it there so I can kind of see it, but yeah. Now I've got basically what I'd call step one, which is me doing a bit of warm up. I've kind of copied that drawing over, and now I have like a good construction drawing that doesn't look that good, but that's okay. So I'm going to duplicate it. Let's hide this one. And I'm going to use just big soft eraser and see if I can refine and figure out some of this detail. I think that was probably a bit much. I feel like the sensitivity on this particular Wacom, it's weird even going from two Wacom Cintiqs, like the one I have over there is very different to this one, which I normally record tutorials on. All right. So the reason, again, I like to simplify the process and the tools, simple layers, is that, you know, I often really like to work this way, where if you have a big enough Cintiq, it can be, you know, possible to kind of just make the image really big and then just kind of imagine it's a big bit of paper. I think that can be a really good way to, you know, go fast. And I'm going to reduce the opacity of this brush a bit. Yeah, just kind of go fast and figure things out. not really worry too much about, zooming in. I think if you keep the level of detail that you can see like consistent, it especially in the beginning, this is one of the best tricks you can use to improve things early on. Digitally drawing, because it's so easy to just zoom up, add a whole bunch of detail for no reason, is just set your zoom and then don't go past that, right? Like don't increase past that. But you need a big enough Cintiq or drawing tablet to do it, right? It's a little bit harder on an iPad. So again, like a big part of what I'm trying to do is sort of figure out like what is the form here, right? Like what is actually going on? I do feel like when I initially did this, I wasn't 100% sure on the form, and thus didn't entirely work out. Boom. So let's try and refine this guy. Boom, 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 boom. And very tricky to know like what marks to make that are gonna help me really sell this idea, because I did a lot of mark making in that thumbnail that was a bit kind of unique. And this is also a design process, right? So there's certainly a degree to where the more I draw this character and really try and figure it out, this sort of creature, really figure out like what's happening, the easier all of this will be. Because there's just going to be things that work and things that don't when it comes to these types of designs. But mostly a lot of what I'm dealing with here is just the abstract nature of how these things kind of overlap. And it does seem like what I need to have is some kind of feeling, or that there will be some lines that are kind of indicating this form. And also when you're designing these types of creatures, there's rhythms to the way that the particular little sort of folds of the flesh and all these bits and pieces sort of flow together, right? We need to make sure that there's some sort of logic to it, which again I'm not entirely sure I've figured out yet. Let's think about perspective. I feel like this little tentacle thing, should be about there, or at least, maybe let's think about where that perspective is, right? That's gonna really define a lot of stuff. So again, I feel like we've got a horizon line pretty low. Although there's no reason for these different structures to, be blocky or anything like that, I feel like it does help us to understand them, to have some of these lines in the rocks follow that perspective, at least a little bit. Normally when I'm just roughing in these types of rocks, mostly what I want is just where they are, right? I just need to know where they are, and I'll kind of hash out the details later. What I'm trying to do is just create an overlap of space so that we get a feeling that have multiple objects in front of each other, and that will create the sense of depth that I need. Boom. And so yeah, like you know, refining a sketch like this, I think can be super challenging. One of the things I've got to do is kind of look at which of these lines that I created are actually part of the major form, right? So there's sort of a flow to this character in general that I need to maintain. So here's me zooming out a little bit. This is probably not what I should do, but I feel like I need to zoom out in order to treat this a little bit more like a thumbnail again. So we've got different, well, different forms intersecting. So yeah, I feel like if I re-establish some of these overall lines, some of these lines of motion, this is probably how I did get to this form that I had, right? Got this kind of whale-like head. And then if I try and think about, yeah, like what's happening with these overall shapes here, right? So going back to construction. Boom. So knee there. Right, hip somewhere here. What does this leg look like? I don't know. But yeah, for me, this is helping me a lot to really get in there and hash out what's going on. Boom. And you can see again, like the brush I'm using doesn't matter, right? It's all good. It's all working all right. And often this is where it's so important, is that, like, you know, probably I could take this, right? I could take this level of sketchiness where, like, at least now I have, right? I have some of the form planned a little bit more. I have a better understanding of where some of the anatomy might be, which is going to hopefully allow me to be a bit more sort of precise with the details that I place on top. Now that I've got that, yeah, it should be a bit easier for me to wing it, let's say. So again, I feel like the more overlap here, the better. Boom, boom. All right, just making sure I can see things properly. Boom, boom. So I've got that. Those are the major forms. And yeah, once I kind of have the flow, like the overall flow, I'm finding it a lot easier now to add stuff onto it. And also need to break some of these silhouettes here, right? So there's like a rhythm from a design perspective about the pattern, right? The patterns that are created where there's detail, where we break the silhouette, right? Where we create these sort of weird growths or whatever. And again, I think it's so important to really pay attention to the thumbnail. I know I'm like a broken record with this stuff, but there's often so many little marks that give feeling and emotion. And easy to miss as we add structure, right? So it's easy to say add secondary form, right? Like really think about, okay, like where are these different things coming, right? They're just coming down. Are these like flat? Like what's happening here? That'll help me render it, shade it if I need to, do all of that stuff. Boom. So yeah, really trying to think about how these lines kind of intersect. Now, which one of these lines am I actually going to draw? Because I'm going to be, making this a fairly clean line style look. I have literally no idea. But there is a point to where I start to kind of feel the flow about how much detail I kind of need to put in to like the construction phase to really understand it. And I think there's a point at which we flip, or at least I flip from, thinking about the drawing that I'm doing and the way that it relates to the drawing that I'm actually going to do, versus trying to kind of get these lines to work, right? As sort of final lines. There's a point at which I'm starting to think about, okay, where does this form go? What's happening? And the lines that I'm drawing here then switch to a stage where they're kind of informing and testing out the lines that I will draw, but there's not necessarily 100% overlap. What that means is that the lines I'm drawing now are not necessarily designed, or nor am I conceiving of them as lines that I will be copying or tracing or replicating, but they're there for me to explore the form and to play around with it. See if I can show some depth. And it's all this little subtle stuff, right? The secondary form, right? Well, like, how does this thing overlap, right? And again, how do we get the rhythm of one line, right, sort of moving into another? Because there's a degree to where, some of the designs I do have a real clean line look. This one, though, feels like it is going to work with a little bit of texture in it. So again, I think I have like a bit of a, feeling there's like a sag there. Oh. And I normally just go into hit eraser, hit E to go into eraser mode, and erase out stuff, just refine. Sometimes the structure can be there, but what I need is a good indication of what line is actually going to go in front of what line. Sometimes you can figure this out in the final lines. You don't need to, make sure that we erase and figure out what goes in front of what. Other times you totally do need to erase and figure it out, because what we're doing is planning for that. So if I can plan for that, then everything kind of works out well. So I like the idea of two major forms here. See if I can get that, even though there might be some smaller growths on them. Just going to make sure that we feel that. And again, I should look up some animal anatomy and really do a better job than I'm probably going to do on this, but we'll probably be okay by winging it. All right, let's look at this. I really needed to get these ellipses working this way. Boom. Right, in there. Let's see what we were doing in the thumbnail. I had some weird stuff in the thumbnail. I had like, so where's the, again, what's happening here? this weird kind of humped. Right. Well, yeah. So I think this guy has like this kind of hunchback. Right. It's a bit more like that. Yeah, I think that's right. And so this thing here is designed kind of to sit on top of that. Let's see if we can break down some of that form. And then I think the idea was that we have this very organic look. To the way this saddle is created. So again, it's still not making sense to me 100%, but I'm just working through it, right? Again, make sure all these things line up. Boom, boom. And the idea is this thing here is kind of like handlebars or something that you can hang on to. Put a few bits of random cloth around there to sort of break that up. Some stitching. At some point you kind of need some stirrups of some kind. Again, probably not an actual way a saddle would work, but it's going to do. Got this thing coming here. I think that needs to come at a slightly different angle. Boom, 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 boom. And here again, I'm not sure what this shape was in the original. Boom. But basically, again, I'm going to try and create some sense of overlap here. And then, yeah, I think these little lines here. But again, it's just, this is often what happens is I have like one idea for how, you know, some of these saddles could be created, or, you know, how you would sort of store stuff on these creatures, and then because I'm lazy, I just kind of copy it a million times. I feel like this is better off if it's a bit smaller. Already got enough silhouette play there. Boom, boom. So again, how does all this stuff connect and join up? Like, I'm not 100% sure, right? Still, it's kind of fantasy land, right? And, you know, like if this was actually something that, you know, I made into a comic book character, something like that, would certainly need to, you know, figure it out and redesign it for simplicity and brevity and how much fun it is to draw. If this was a, you know, design for a game, you'd have to redesign it probably a bunch of times to make sure all this stuff worked and, you know, sort of flows, goes together. You know, you do mock-up models, see if it kind of animates okay. You know, see if all these things move together in an interesting, good fashion. And that's where you kind of hash out and figure out a lot of these details. So again, I'm not always trying to make them function 100%. Putting some ropes here. Again, just all those little secondary details. Let's refine this, because this is like a weird thing. I'm imagining this is kind of some organic bit. That is kind of going together. This doesn't really make, it doesn't make 100% sense to me yet, but again, it might be one of those things that kind of turns out. It might be one of those things that just ends up looking complicated. So trying to visualize and think about the draw through on this, but again, I'm not actually drawing through that much. If we were to have this saddle on the other side, right, it would probably be something like this. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So yeah, just gonna keep thinking about what we can add to aid with the silhouette breakup, make this logical. More things hanging down. Baubles, etc. And yeah, you know, like I feel like that's starting to come together. Boom, 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 boom. Again, got to really refine these areas. Make sure we get some good flow happening there from one thing to another. And you don't really need to worry that deeply about what is happening there, because the character is in front, but we'll just make sure we're not gonna, yeah, it's at least gonna be okay. So again, just playing with like how the rhythm of these lines and how these forms are connected together, how that's gonna work, right? Again, there is a degree to where I want it to be a bit gross, right? It's going to trigger weird things in people's mind to have this kind of look like this. That's kind of the point. It's meant to be like, ugh, what's that? I feel like camels can be a bit like that. Like a lot of these animals kind of got weird stuff. You know, like the knees on camels, and there's a lot of animals with like weird stuff, right, on them. And this is kind of it can be very triggering, and that's kind of the goal, right? With a lot of creature design, right, like alien design, a lot of those classic things. You know, your classic Geiger. You know that there is like a subconscious degree to where, you know, that stuff is sort of provocative and triggering. You know, a lot of these classic designs are phallic in some way, shape, or form. You know, that tends to be effective. There are many instances where I have heard people talking about that, like, you know, as like an unstated goal in concept design, right? Like, how phallic can it be? And yeah, often that stuff is purposeful, right? People are really thinking about why that works. And again, it doesn't have to be like that. There's a lot of these kind of psychoactive imagery things that kind of just make you feel a certain way. Often our job as concept designers is to kind of spot these. So one of the other things you're kind of noticing here is I've sort of like found a like a pencil size that kind of works, that's allowing me to do what I want, that's allowing me to get the level of detail that I want here. And yeah, the next step here is just this character. Like, can we fix this? Can we plus it? One of the things that was, yeah, pretty boring about that initial design is that, you know, the character was just pretty standard. So it might be a good chance to, you know, just kind of play around, see what we can do, see how we can make this character a little bit more interesting. Just gonna block in some features here, see whether the general kind of angle is working. Find center. If we zoom up, Again, I normally wouldn't zoom up, but might be easier to see what I'm doing. Think about where those cheekbones are. I'm just going to find the middle first. This is often something I've been doing lately as a construction. That way we can find the jaw. And I can think about where that mouth will be. Boom. If we follow this round, put some ears in. Right, ears over here. And then I think the shape I had originally was something similar to this. Think about where center is. Yeah. Again, not entirely sure what we're going to end up with, but we'll just keep playing around with it. Got center here. Yeah, so I'm just going to, before I mess around too much with the expression or anything like that, I'm just going to make sure that the basic thing is kind of sorted. All right. And by basic thing, I mean, let's make sure the structure, the size is right, so we can see there. Again, that head has become too big. That is what happens when you zoom in to be like, oh, now I'm drawing a head. Let's zoom in. Let's see if we can fix that here. Again, he was looking sort of a little bit sort of cartoonish, right? Like I do like him feeling a little bit younger. And then we had this type of design for the kind of scarf thingy. But I think we also had a simplified shoulder pad, and then this cape was going over here. Boom. Let's see if I can still make it come roughly in that direction. Something like that. Now, putting in that sort of, it may seem like I'm sort of redrawing this, but putting in that initial rough anatomical version makes this a lot easier. So this thing that I'm doing now, where I'm kind of going around and really looking at where, right, like where all of those larger forms are going to be. This is, yeah, a lot easier now that I have that initial proportion there. And yeah, a lot of these shapes that I drew were kind of just for fun, right? Like I didn't really figure out what we had over here, right? Like this, yeah, some sort of fur-lined hood. Mostly, I think it was just there because I thought it would look cool, which is not always, that's not what you should do with design, right? It should be more functional than that, but again, that's just what we're working with. Boom. All right. And again, I can go in and modify the facial features a little bit. Maybe make them more or less boyish as I want. But the main thing here is that this character was kind of wearing like a poncho style thing. All right, so we're going to see and I think this is going to kind of bunch up here. think like if this is where, again, if you're posing things, it can be really good to just like imagine if I'm kind of sitting there and my arm is kind of out to the side, like kind of just what happens, right? Like what is happening to the, right, to the overall kind of look, right? Oh. So that's going that way. Then which way does this one go? And I think just kind of relaxing that pose a little bit is going to be a good idea. Boom. There, something like that. And again, this will be shadow, and we'll try and put some kind of pattern on this. So yeah, again, the way I normally do this is I just kind of try and act it out, right? Like putting my hand and sort of thinking about like, right, you know, sort of where are these things going to go? I'm just going to be drawing a, right, like a very kind of simplified hand here. Nothing kind of crazy, but that's normally how I try and solve the problem, right? I still have a feeling that, right, like this is going to be a little bit awkward. But we'll see. All right, then this, really want to try and push some of the shape design we had here. Think about this sword / knife thing he's got. Get a good shape out of it. Again, there's like a million bad tangents here. And again, I've got to remember there is this kind of leg back here. That's going to be pretty sort of toned down. There'll also be one over here. Well, yeah. But I mean, either way, I think like, you know, the bottom line is I feel like the whole thing is kind of working a little bit better than it did the last run through. So still going to be, like, I'm doing a lot of this work, but the goal is not to create some, you know, crazy level of detail on this, right? The goal is still for this to be just a, you know, like a sketchy, kind of simple illustration. There we go. So he's got some weird, crazy sort of scabbard / sword thingy. Again, I'm trying to replace some of these little baubles and bits and pieces, give this some complexity. Belt here, belt buckle, this thing's hanging down. Again, we've got different. It's on the sword. And yeah, try and think about what's happening here. With these clothes. Maybe a patch or something like that on here. Again, I want it to make it clear. It's like there's a little bit of a vagabond here, and I feel like that kind of fits with the weird look of this thing, right? It should be a certain degree to where we're questioning what is going on. So again, a lot of these details are what I would describe as kind of like, as long as we don't mess them up, they're going to work all right. They're just going to fade into the distance. giving him some earrings or something like that. I just like the, again, that kind of weird traveling look. Yeah. So again, I feel like I'm like, yeah, some of this stuff is working. I think we're sort of going in a better direction. Now this was a cool shape for the tail. It doesn't really seem to fit the rest of it. But maybe if I add some of this other stuff here, I can make it feel kind of right. Yeah, not sure. So this is the point where the reason I'm often sort of talking and prattling on about like, oh, it doesn't, like, look, this is just a sketch, is that this is the point where I'm trying to decide like when is enough, right? Like how much do I actually have to do here? How much is gonna, you know, actually matter for me in terms of, you know, doing extra drawing? A good way to think about this is like if you only have an extra half an hour or 10 minutes to kind of plus the drawing, right? Like what do you do? Like what are you gonna do? If you're uncertain, I think a good thing to do is to sort of duplicate the layer, which is again just the simplest way I have for, you know, just making sure, hey, still got that one, can go back there, and that way we can progress, we can try some stuff. Just thinking about like where am I gonna want detail, right? Like where should I plan stuff? Where is going to help me? Where am I going to regret not putting in effort? So I think that I really should have a go at this face, right? And I don't really have a lot to go on. So again, is it like, is he friendly? Is he not friendly? What is going on? What are we going to do? Again, I like a bit of, like, the eyes not so friendly, the mouth is kind of in the middle. I like that kind of feeling of ambiguity there. I think that's alright. Alright, what's going on with these things? Look, I think I'm going to have to figure this out as we go. But yeah, there is this feeling that they're kind of in this ravine or something. So again, I'm gonna create like a bunch of little rocks here to tell the story that like this thing is far away over here. Right, like over here is very far away. These rocks here that are big are actually big, and that lends scale to some of the scale that I've got here. It gives us a bit more of an indication of where we are, right? So again, I describe this as telling the story of where we are. And maybe there are other rocks and formations in the background that we're not quite sure about. Yeah, But again, I think that'll do for a sketch, and I'm not sure what's happening in the clouds up here. Again, I feel like that might be a bit much information. Just keep it even more vague. Although a lot of this will be like faded out quite a bit. Anyway, that's probably enough for what we got. So yeah, I think this is enough. Now you will notice that I think this was flipped, and this was the original sort of composition. I don't really know which one I prefer, but what I will do is just spend a few minutes sort of fiddling around with it flipped, just to make sure that I'm doing the most I can with the form. So I'm kind of changing it a little bit here, right? I'm pushing it into the third dimension there. Now, does this face hold up? Look, that looks like it would actually work, which is not always the case. Well, let's move that down. Make the eraser smaller. Yeah. Get that right. That right. I feel like again I just want like a nice line here, right? Like nice flowy line. Now we get the feeling that there's some wind, which doesn't necessarily track with what I've got here, right? Because these are flowing. So this is where again I got to decide like what am I, right? I've got these things kind of flowing. It's so easy to do this, right? To be like, oh, I'm going to create a cool shape here. But then I don't know whether that actually works because I've got lots of wind going this way. So I could just kind of keep it the way it is, right? Because that's just, we're in fantasy land. It's okay. And again, that might be something that works. I really think that this should be a little bit simplified. All right, so yeah, we're getting there. Kind of coming along. Well, yeah. All right. I think that's going to have to do. I'm not seeing anything major, right? That's going to, I think ruin my day. I feel like this could look like it's coming over more, but it's hard to say. I think we probably have to call it a day for this. So all I do here is just create a new layer. I'm going to fill it with white. We're going to reduce the opacity. And then, do I want it this way or this way? I think it's really hard to tell. I think this way works, yeah. So now we're just going to create some finished lines. So I'm thinking that we're going to have a bunch of stuff in the foreground and that I'm just going to ink this. Shift B gets me to my inking brush. How big is this? It's pretty big. I think I'm like, right, is this the right brush size? Not quite sure. If I make it 10, I feel like 10 might be better. So again, the reason I think it can be useful to, so I'm just going to start in foreground. The reason I think it can be useful to Is that going to be too big? Let's go for 15 in the foreground here with some of these background elements or foreground elements. Yeah, the reason I find it so useful to just make sure, you know, as many of those brush switching things as possible, right? As much of that stuff as I possibly can. Right, let's just keep it simple. You know, having a shortcut set up for that, right, where I can just flick and bam, you know, now I'm on the right brush, is so useful, mostly because it doesn't take focus away. It's not actually saving that much time, but I really do think it saves a lot of focus to just know what the tools are, know what the next step is, and to just be able to get there easily. So again, I'm using very simple rock props here. And it's funny because these are like very similar to what I've been drawing in Star Atlas Core. There's so many rocks in that comic. So many crazy asteroids, living rocks and things. So yeah, I should try and, if I had a little bit more time, I'd really try and design these a bit better, but because I'm so pressed for time here, I'm gonna try and just do this quickly. So I'm gonna call this, I'm just gonna name the layers because I do think it does make things easier. And here we'll have foreground 1, foreground 2, and just a little bit of stuff here will make this much easier as we progress. Right, got some rocks. Boom. Because these are very simple rocks, and I'm not going to pay heaps of attention to rendering them that differently. So I'm not going to do, you know, like a lot of shading, right? We could really sort of shade them and make sure we put tonality in there from foreground to background. What I'm going to do is, again, leverage the clean line style that I'm working with, and I will try as much as I can to separate out these different foreground elements with color. So boom, boom. And the point there is, like, if I create a few more lines, if I create layers, sorry, if I create a few more layers, it can really make a big difference. I feel like this is not really working. Yeah, it can make a huge difference in the feeling of complexity and sort of finish that we get in the end, with very little actual difference, right? Just to put a few extra layers in here, right? A few of these rocks on separate layers, and this means that I'm going to be able to create a much better sort of foreground, middle ground, background dynamic. Right, foreground there. Then we got this one, and this one I think is going to be kind of everything else, like this one here. And yeah, what I find is, like, even if I'm just drawing very basic, basically just like this, right? Just if I do that, but if I put them on separate layers, it makes everything feel a lot better. So just gonna block in the basics of these shapes first. Boom. Boom. Let's get this one. Zoom in. Just make sure this goes behind here nicely. and yeah, I'll probably just make this go in front of this, otherwise it'll get complicated. Alright. I think I had another rock here. Boom. 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 So I have a second monitor that's like above this one, and I'm looking at it just to kind of check how some of these details look. This just gives me a feeling for like the complexity. Is this working? Is it not working? Right? Do I need to vary? And this really is, as I often say, just an abstract exercise in pattern making. It's like a little bit here, a little bit there. It's hard to learn this stuff. You kind of have to a certain degree, just play around with it, right? You kind of just have to figure it out. Now it's tricky because I kind of got all these characters on the same layer. And I'm not sure how exactly that is going to work out. So what I probably will do is have, let me go mount, and then in front of that is character. Let's call this creature. So I'm going to kind of basically, just so you know where I'm going, all of this, right, the creature, the rock that it's standing on, right, that'll be one layer, and then the character will be its own layer. That's the basic idea. So I'm going to do the character first. And the reason for that is, you know, I kind of have like this overlapping this, but I don't want to do some tricky thing where I'm kind of putting this leg on its own layer. Now, I could obviously just put the character on the same layer as the creature, but I think it'll be useful to kind of treat them as if they are on the same layer, but then be able to kind of just separate a bit between them with a bit of atmosphere here and there. I think that might be useful. So here's the character. All right, here we go. Boom. And this is what I want is a 10. Now I don't often, in terms of just brush size, I don't often change brush size from foreground to background. But in this case, I feel like just drawing those rocks with slightly bigger brush is going to allow me to just do them quicker. And again, you know, the general rule is, yeah, you know, foreground lines are bigger, so that makes sense. But generally, with this kind of style, I'm imagining that, you know, I'm just kind of doing it all with the same brush. Boom. Now again, part of the thing here that I think from a design perspective works is, right, this guy kind of has this hair, but it kind of mimics the weird growth that creature has. Right, and like I wonder whether, right, they're kind of like the same size, right? There's something design-wise about that that's kind of fun. Right, here's the earring. Connected up there. Got the ear. Just going to suggest what's happening with this thing as it goes behind there. Got the eye. So it's often like this, the precise way that we draw the like the mouth makes like such a difference, right? And again, putting a few little indications of form here and there. Boom, boom, boom. Basic shoulder pad, very silly, simplified shoulder pad. Alright, this is going up here. This is going, what's happening here? Got this earring. Got this. So always, I mean, one of the major things to sort of doing finished lines or inking, whatever you want to call it, I think so much of it is about understanding, like, when do you need to keep going with a line? When can you break, right? So again, you know, do I do a line here and then we keep going, right? Is this one thing? Is it two things? Who knows? Not getting caught up where we need to, you know, do too much. All right, so there's a bit of vagueness here that I was like, can we get away with that? Probably not. So yeah, often if I need to join a line, I'll do this thing where I kind of erase a bit of it. Just that makes the smoothness of it join up together a bit more. Put a bit of weathering on this cape. I'm just going to make sure I join that up properly though. Alright, what do we got here? Got this poncho thingy. So again, you know, is it one line? Do I need to do it in one line? Do I need to do it in two? Right, if I kind of transition over here, right, sort of fade it off a bit, rotate, and make sure like that I can continue that line. I mean, the surprising thing that I find is that coming from someone who is a digital first kind of artist, right, I kind of learned to do all these things digitally. You always kind of imagine when people are inking that you know, they get these lines that really look very perfect. But then you kind of see people actually doing those lines, and yeah, there's a lot of sort of chicken scratch. There's a lot of people, you know, kind of finding a line with multiple lines, right? So, you know, you see some big swirly line and you imagine someone's got that, but, you know, they're kind of like doing 1, 2, 3, you know, 4, 5, and then they're touching it up and getting the lines that they get in really interesting ways, right? I think with this, it's just important to understand there's far less rules than we imagine. You know, and the major thing is just, look, does it work, right? Okay. Think about, all right, this being like a separate color. And let's put a little shadow under here. Let's see if we can push a couple of these bits and pieces. Boom, boom. All right. So it's going to be sort of vague back here. Again, this is not important to the success of the illustration. This is what I often sort of think of as like, yeah, a dangerous area, right? There's like a hand, you know, I haven't drawn or constructed it that well. How important is it to the overall image, right? Is it something where, like, if it, right? If it fails, is the whole image going to be no good? If I get it right, is it going to make any difference? Like, does anyone actually care? All this stuff. So there's often things that are very important to the success of the image, but you know, are not necessarily anything to do with good or bad drawing, or you know, something being a challenge. And then there are things like that where it's like, oh, it's a hand in the background. I kind of sketched it in. I don't really know, you know, whether it's that good or not. As I come to render it, I realize like, I have underestimated how good that sketch was. This is now going to become a nightmare. So I think, you know, honestly, the more that I look at, you know, artists who I really admire, the thing that people are good at is making you, and I keep saying this all the time, is making you not look where they don't want you to look. So if there is like a bit of a hand somewhere that's, you know, a bit sort of fugly, you probably won't notice it, because the artist is good at making sure you don't look there, right? That's not important. And that often is just the difference. So you imagine like, oh, all the hands are drawn well, except for these ones that, you know, you never saw because they didn't want you to see them. That's not the ideal, but that is frequently the reality. And yeah, really important to be able to sort of like spot that and just do the best job you can with a particular area of the image, and realize like, is this in the focal area? Does this need to be drawn? Does this need to be executed really, really well? Right? Can you get away with it? Who knows? And again, everyone's opinion of this, everyone's, you know, sort of tolerance for that is completely different. There's many artists who are known for like obviously caring about all the little bits and pieces, right? And they create this kind of high level of polish to everything they do. And look, I personally have realized I'm not that type of person. Which doesn't mean that, you know, like I can't do that type of art. It's just I've just sort of realized that yeah, I'm more interested in the sort of story side of it, and creating sort of quicker work, let's say. Where does this go? So yeah, everyone has to figure out like where they sit along those lines. And what strategies and techniques you use to, again, get the look you want. So again, this feels like my hand is not going to be able to go, so let's make that 2 lines. Boom. Again, let's have the feeling of maybe there being a seam there. Boom. Yeah. Right. Like this hand is probably a little bit more important, and still I'm just gonna make it a bit wobbly. Again, sometimes it'll work out better than others. See if we can create some dimensionality on top of this. Boom. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that hand really bothers me, but we'll see. This one bothers me too, but again, I feel like it's alright. So this area here where these characters meet is going to be super important, because that will be, this whole thing is going to be on its own layer. Boom. Boom. Again, what's happening with these boots, I have literally no idea. That will probably have to do. So again, you know, like whether or not I add a bit of this sort of feathering here, you know, bit of stuff, right? Bit of texture. You know, it's just all up to taste. These are the subtle changes, the subtle little bits and pieces. So I'm going to trace that in my head. Here we go. Let's draw this one. Again, see if we can break that up. Think about where we might have holes in this capey thing. Again, and then this is sort of coming over here. We're going to go down here. Come up here. Again, I think I sort of had the idea that maybe, right, this is going to come over here. So all that's happening is this bit of the cape here is kind of disappearing into shadow. So I'm giving it some abstract kind of hatching. And these things can kind of join together to a certain degree. Now this one is a little bit more challenging because I feel like we have a bit of form that I'm trying to describe. So again, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, like this is a cylinder, and so, you know, I'm just kind of creating some of these hatch lines at least with that form, but this is very rudimentary and 100% abstract, right? And by that I just mean these marks do not realistically represent what is going on. But once we color it, I think it'll kind of all make sense. There we go. So again, in a similar way, do we put some marks on the top to show what's going on? Like, yeah, I think that kind of works. What about this guy? I feel like a bit of kind of haggardness under the eyes might be good. But other than that, I'm like, yeah, that look, it works. We need a scabbard in there. Boom, 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 boom. Let's make sure we don't create a weird tangent there. And again, in a similar way, this is going to fall into shadow. All right. Done. All right, now we need the creature. Okay, I have no idea where to start. I have no idea whether or not this is going to work. Let's start with this thing. See if I can join these up. And yeah, I'm expecting to maybe have to do like a few undos on this one. I don't really know. But I'm going to start smack bang with the focal area. Boom. boom. And just see if I sort of build this out. Whether or not it's going to work for me. Because what I did have was this sort of breakdown of like, right, I sort of created like a bit of a, like a compound shadow there. I'm not sure if that's going to work with the style or not. Again, a lot of this is stuff I'm figuring out as I go. Just trying to think about what is going to create the right textural pattern for this particular look. But yeah, I'm like not really buying any of that. I think it needs to be a lot simpler. Yeah. What goes? I think that goes over there. That goes over there. So again, working a little bit cross purposes with my body, trying to get some of these marks happening. So I'm just rotating the page, making sure I can get these. Now this is really easy to do if I have another screen like I do, where I can kind of see what's going on with it. Now I kind of want to be able to do these in one go. That feels like that's going to end up poorly. Let's see if we can join these up. Bang, there we go. Alright, what about here? Should we go? Again, a lot of it, I'm not really drawing with my shoulder, I'm kind of just drawing like with one sort of stroke of the pen there. Oh, I forgot my character, I've got this. Again, do I need this? Do I need this stuff? Oh, maybe, maybe not. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, I mean, I think that adds something. It adds a little bit of texture, maybe. Here we go. Needing to focus on this. Like there is a degree to where if we're dealing with abstractions, i.e. marks that kind of don't really represent anything, but are just kind of meant to evoke a feeling or something, so it can, like, if I can really optimize the flow and the look of these, it'll have a fun look. If I get too caught up in like trying to, you know, sit there rendering the form, right, and really just sort of saying, oh, that's not accurately rendering the form, or this is happening, or that's not happening. I feel like personally that's where things can start to tighten up, and it's so important to get that mix of realism versus abstraction sorted. But yeah, this like doing this thing is definitely something that's like a little bit new for me, trying to get this particular texture. And I always like the idea with creature design of like multiple potential faces, multiple potential heads. So just exploring some different like textural bits and pieces that I can add to this to give it again a feeling of like texture. I don't think that works at all. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. And also, you know, other things that I feel like can make these decisions easier is just speed, right? My subconscious mind can probably make better choices with some of these lines than my conscious mind. If I focus too much on it being perfect, it can be very easy to kind of end up with a nothing. If I just kind of say, look, I got it, right? I got to do it. It's got to be done. Then yeah, that might be easier to just kind of start letting things go. So you can see there again, this is like perfect example. I'm kind of tightening up, losing. Like this line is just a nothing, right? Like that one is kind of just complete nonsense. But like, can I, should I put it in? Like, does this still fit? Again, should we try and make this, right, like add some textural elements to some of these areas that are, you know, probably going to be a bit darker or in the background. I don't know. It could be good to do that on a separate layer. I'm just going to do it here because I think that's something that will work. And we've expressed that in the character. So yeah, that might be something that kind of feels like sort of viable. I don't know. Could easily be just ruining what would be a nice clean line kind of look by adding a lot of texture to it. So what I often do is just let's do all that, then let's delete it all, or delete as much as we can. Are we going to be able to get all the way back to nothing? Like, oh yeah. Is that adding? I don't know. I don't think we need it. I'm just going to go without. Again, I might try to put it on a separate line. Maybe here and there, right? We could deal with that. But yeah, in general. All right, let's. Whoa. And it can be hard to know like how much of this is going to make a difference. Once you kind of put color on it, many things start to kind of fade away, become way less important. And you know, often I've had feelings where like, yeah, I'm working on something, I feel like the lines are really working, it's going well, and then, you know, it just doesn't work. Frequently I've been working on stuff where I feel like, look, this is basically just an abandonment project, right? Like this is never going to work. And then, you know, it turns out to be, you know, one of the best things I've ever done. Or, you know, again, something that a lot of people respond well to. creating some slight sense of texture with these initial kind of lines, right? And, you know, again, I often find that about, you know, looking at other people's, you know, inking work and stuff they've done. I don't always understand how they're going to color it, you know, how the decisions they're making are going to work. But, you know, frequently little things people are doing that you look at in the moment, you know, kind of ends up being okay. And, yeah, it's so important to just appreciate that. Can be a major hurdle in the beginning of your sort of artistic journey when you are thinking about, is this good? Is this not good? Right? Yeah, can be very hard to tell whether the thing you're doing is actually looking good or is not actually looking good. And mostly what we're building is a sense of like instinct for these things. That's what I think anyway. Well, alright, so again, we kind of got like this sort of working. Again, I've put like a little bit more detail in some of these areas than others, so I'm like, part of me is kind of wondering, like, would a bit more here and there help? Like maybe a feeling of this. I always felt like, again, like probably part of where this is coming is from that sort of the never-ending story, like sort of Falcor look. That's probably subconsciously where it's kind of coming from. This idea of this kind of weird bobbliness, like underneath. I don't know whether this is working either. It's always like that. That thing always freaked me out about that design. I was like, why does it look like that? What is going on? A lot of good psychoactive movies in the 80s. Yeah, anyway, so here I'm just trying to kind of balance, like there's this detail here that's more high frequency, and I'm just kind of thinking like, okay, can I put a bit of that over here? And again, I was playing around with it before. I'm doing the same thing again and expecting a different result. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Boom, boom. Yeah. Yeah, we will find out. And I'm going to see whether putting in some of these contour lines will work as well, right? Again, like maybe one or two. I don't know, honestly. Really hard to tell. I've got a whole pile of details here that we just need to work through, right? Because that's basically it. Whether or not this works is going to be down to, you know, those decisions I made there, right? Like you know, does this face work? Again, going to be hard to tell until it's actually done, I think. Boom. 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 All right, getting there. All right, so here, got a make sure this matches well. All right. Boom. Boom. Yeah, so again, I feel like that's kind of going in an interesting direction, but lots of kind of unknowns that I feel like will be very tricky to figure out until we get to the finish. And part of me is like how simple should this stuff be, right? Like should I take another stab at this, right? Like, because I feel like it could be better to really break up and have less. Right, just make some of those lines a little bit, right, a little bit cleaner, so we get that nice balance. So I might play around with that. Just making these lines a little bit simpler. And I think that might help me out over here where, again, I have some of this stuff that was looking a little bit messy, right? Boom. Yeah. And so much of this is just design. It's just complexity, right? Like how much complexity, like how do we represent particular types of skin with this particular style, right? Again, so many unique questions that every new image we create kind of brings up. But yeah, honestly, I don't really know. But I'm going to take a break in a minute and come back at it with fresh eyes, because I think that's often a good thing to do. Even if it's just 5 minutes, take a break, come back, and then see if we can make some of those decisions. Because yeah, some of them, it's hard to know how that's gonna turn out until we actually get color there. All right, so I've taken a break. I'm coming back. I'm looking at this. I have opinions. I've got things that I think are kind of working, things that I think aren't working, just in terms of this overall concept of how much detail to put in there, how much to think about texture versus not texture. And yeah, I think I'm going to take a lot of this back, really try and streamline the iconic representation of how these things look. So I'm going to think very much about putting purposeful marks and just kind of leaving it a little bit simpler. I think that the other thing I was sort of noticing is with the shape of these things, some of them maybe just trying to dial back on the randomness of some of these forms. And I think I'm going to get rid of all of this texture and some of these more random looking marks that I've got here. And again, you know, a lot of this just comes down to making sure my muscle memory is making the right decisions. So here, very much trying to solve these problems on the conscious level. The more that I draw this creature or think about, you know, how this kind of works, the more that, you know, I think I'll just be able to kind of flow along and do it. But yeah, I'm going to try and see whether just simplifying some of these lines will help me. We'll see. And, you know, I feel like this is the kind of stuff that normally I wouldn't do. And this, I think, is like a big reason why why it sort of wasn't turning out how I wanted, right? It's all these subtle things. There's like obviously something here that is fundamental that I'm kind of seeing in the original design that is not coming through when I'm doing the finished lines, which to me is super interesting. I also really like, again, just revisiting the sketch and the thumbnail. Well, I'll just bring that here so you can see. Again, I like how some of these feel a little bit more like they are these anatomical markers as opposed to sort of growths and weird things. I think the mix of that is super important. And yeah, something I'm going to try and play around with. So we're still, just make sure I'm still on the right layer. Just going to decrease the, like the taper and the feeling of these things dripping a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that to me makes more sense. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that when we simplify tools, which, as you know, I'm always about, you start to think more about the tools that you do have, right? So I don't necessarily have a lot of, if we're thinking about style, I don't necessarily have a lot of, let's say, textural abilities in my arsenal. I don't have a lot of form in my arsenal, but what I do have is this kind of repetition of shape and the patterns that I'm often dealing with as I create that. The other thing that it's kind of hard to see here that I think is important is that I really feel like in the sketch, this line, right, kind of comes up a bit. Super subtle, but I feel like that's quite important. You can see these lines are getting messed up a bit. You know, often what I'll do is, you know, once I've kind of figured them out, I'll just go through and erase and see if I can do a better job at it. Now, another thing that, you know, is sort of worth mentioning here is, you know, you obviously couldn't do quite this same thing if you were inking for real, but I've always been surprised at the degree to which, you know, artists that I see do actually with ink hack around and delete stuff with whiteout and all sorts of different tools. So it's definitely something that is possible to do with ink, right? Like go through and mess around with all these different bits and pieces, tweak things. All right. So again, I'm not sure about that. Well, but I'm gonna tweak this. And I think just giving these things a consistency, again, defines the difference where it is like a, again, like something that's like a weird anatomical feature. And again, I like blending the line between that a little bit, making it not entirely clear whether it is purposeful or not purposeful. So again, here I'd like to see if we can make this right, something a little bit more purposeful. So I'm going to try and make these more iconographic, if that makes sense. Again, these are, that is just more purposeful, less based on form, more based on what's actually happening in terms of like the patterns. So, you know, if I kind of create these series of lines here, it's not that I'm trying to think about the form. I'm sort of simplifying the fact that we're having some sort of texture or element there and trying to break it down into those different shapes. The same way here. All right, I'm just trying to find some lines that will kind of represent what's happening with the form. Very, very subtle difference. Anyway. We'll see how that goes, but that's what I'm going to try. Cool. All right. Let's see what else we can do here. Now, you'll probably be surprised the degree to which I'm kind of obsessing over that stuff. And then probably I will not obsess over a bunch of other stuff that can just get done really quickly. Because not everything is critical to what I care about with this illustration. And what I think anyway is going to make the difference. And I feel like this is definitely part of that. Don't think this saddle thing in this particular image is going to make or break this. So again, just coming through. This is another area where your ability to create, you know, kind of, let's say, average details here where that's creating a few weird tangents, but, you know, to kind of sort out some of the details here based on very rough sketches is based on, you know, time that I have spent drawing similar things again and again and again. All right, oh, that's right, we got, let's make sure that overlaps. Got some ropes here. Just winging all these shapes a little bit, being super rough. So what are these things actually made of here? Not sure. I'm imagining it's some kind of, you know, sort of bone and leather, or some kind of more medieval slash, you know, probably pre-medieval mix of raw materials. But, you know, part of the story here is getting the mix of it feeling like this saddle seems very manufactured, right? It seems like someone has thought about the shape that it is creating. And that, you know, there's a lot of sort of craftsmanship in here, because normally to create, you know, something that has this level of curvature, you would need to, you know, really think about it first. And I think there's that interesting element of sort of juxtaposition between the vagabond look, this weird creature that kind of doesn't necessarily look that healthy or has sort of this weird look, versus this kind of heavily engineered saddle, right, that looks like it hints at the world that this inhabits. So again, being pretty brutal with that design. Oh, that goes under there. We're going to have something under there. That doesn't really work. Let's shift this over. Well, so this is pretty rough, but I don't think it's going to matter too much. That is my assumption. Creating a few little weird shadows here. I think if we fill these in, this will kind of work. And again, like this treatment of texture, that, you know, if I was to look at this normally, like and give it the same level of criticism that I gave a lot of those other things I was working on, yeah, I'm not necessarily convinced it would hold up either. But I've just done it so many times, and I kind of know how it's going to be colored that it's not really a problem. Well, giving this a bit of structure. Yeah, I think that works. And typically as well, like the degree to which personally I would play with things like texture and, you know, thinking about all these little weird marks I've got everywhere. I'm much more likely to add texture to inanimate objects or things that don't necessarily have a lot of character within the story. But I feel like the characters often, for the art style I use, inhabit a more iconographic realm. So we really need to think about the way that they're portrayed. Whereas this stuff is still important, but less important. Boom, boom. Put some kind of, again, different shapes and forms here. And here we've got, yeah, I forget what this was. I think we were gonna have some ropes and things over here somewhere. I might have forgotten exactly where they go. Don't know what that is about. Again, some of these shapes are just super basic. Thinking about this type of blanket with the tassels. And again, all these little bits of, you know, extra lines and extra detail will kind of make a difference in the long run. Little shadows here and there. It kind of means that as I add the color, I'm not going to need to do anything else, right? Like this will probably be able to survive on its own. And think about shadows for these things. Don't know what this is. Doesn't necessarily really matter. So being super rough with that. And here we've got this weird, again, this weird shape created here. Pop. Pop. Just getting in the zone, inking. So apologies if not doing much talking. Again, there's not much to say. After a certain point, we're just filling things in. So a lot of this is, you know, getting these kind of types of images to work here. It's where you've got like a lot of stuff, right? It's just a matter of adding bits and pieces, one by one, creating interesting shapes and pattern and overlap. Yeah, I think that'll all work. Again, we can kind of fade some of that out. Boom. All right, so here, yeah, I do think I want to represent this as being in shadow. And often that the trick is just, like for me again, is to be rougher, right? Makes it really clear that, you know, that's not meant to be too pretty. We'll see how that works out. I might regret being that rough on something. So again, we've got these rocks. Boom. Boom. So again, let's try and be a little bit simpler with that look. So here as well. Boom. Anyway, we'll see whether this works. If not, I'll do another thumbnail. Try and come up with a better way of describing these different feelings of what this creature's skin is like. Boom. Boom. Right, here we go. So again, pretty much finished that thing. I think the rest of it is just downhill from here, right? Again, touch wood. Just a matter of adding detail. So just making sure I'm looking at, you know, where how some of these details and things are looking when I'm viewing them on the smaller sort of version of this that I've got there. But yeah, I think for the most part, It's all going to be fine. So here, again, just adding simple overlaps. Oh, it's a bit clumsy. Boom, boom. All right. Yeah, boom, boom, boom. Most of this is just to keep building the overall silhouettes that we've got here. But yeah, I think that's getting close again. I want to leave it to breathe a little bit. Yeah, and here again. This is probably here. Right, like that's probably in shadow. Yeah, and here we've got the tail. Oh, that's not very good. Let's try again. Let's get that one. Hook it over. Let's rotate. See if we can get a better line there. Boom. And just trying to make it a bit simpler. And again, totally, we'll see if this works, right? Again, could be a huge mistake, but yeah. Let's make this feel as if it's kind of maybe beat up a bit. Cool. Again, one or two textural things here is probably a good idea. And yeah, let's see if we can just like polish off some of these little areas. Boom. So I'm kind of thinking like sort of leather stitching, right? We've got sort of different, similar to the way saddles and things look, right? Got different sort of buckles, ways that these things tend to look, and again, there's going to be sort of patterns beaten into it, etc. And that's what is, to a certain degree, giving us some of these patterns and lines that we see. Anyway, I think that's pretty much done there. What else do we have? So again, we'll just see whether that face works. I mean, I do feel like maybe some of these lines are like a bit, right? Like some of these are a bit much. But so hard to know. So yeah, again, I like the idea of some of these lines, kind of like this flow kind of coming up there, right? But yeah, just not sure how much of it's going to work. I think I just need to color it and see. So let's call that done, and here we'll have a BG black background layer, right? And boom, boom, boom. So I'm just creating this in a very sort of simple procedural manner so that I optimize for how much time it's going to take, because I have a feeling I'm going to end up sort of really sublimating it with the color. Just think about how we can make something basic back here. Because yeah, it really is not gonna matter a whole bunch. But yeah, I do want to consider like the tangents and all these other bits and pieces. But yeah, this needs to be like a 5-minute background. And as I was saying in the sketch phase, that the main thing I need to do is just talk about how these rocks that are going into the distance are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So a big part of, I guess again, similar to the other textures that I'm trying to do, is beyond a certain point, I'm not actually trying to draw different rocks, right? At some point it becomes more a matter of trying to represent rocks, right? So it's like we'll have a few rocks here, a few rocks there, right? A rock here, a rock there. Maybe in the background there's a few, but it's much better to suggest this detail here, I think, because it will kind of make it feel a little bit better. Because otherwise we get a whole bunch of hyper detail here, and we don't necessarily want that. The basic concept there is I'm trying to deal with two contradicting things that need to happen. One is that we are going to see a higher frequency of items in the background there because it is further away, and so we're going to have a whole bunch more rocks. But I don't want to, show a high frequency of detail. So that's where suggestion or losing edges or other kind of textural ideas become so important, right? You can't paint a million rocks, but you can suggest a trillion rocks. It's just with little brush strokes and things that, don't seem like they matter. Alright, so again, that feels like it's sort of sufficient. Back here we're going to have the same thing. So I'm just going to carry this through. This can look a little bit weird, but just means, it's going to be easier for me to do the flatting. And again, these marks here are super abstract and almost meaningless, but it's going to get us what we want. Back here again, just need to show that there is Now, would there be something there? Right, we sort of got something here. Maybe I do want to... Right, put a silhouette line there. Anyway, I think that is done with the lines. Okay, so we got our finished lines here. Now for the coloring, I thought I'd do something a little bit different with this tutorial. Normally I just kind of go through the flatting, but with this one, what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about the thought process involved. And often when I'm just doing the flatting, it's kind of hard to do those two things at once. So this is where we are here. We have the very, very simple lines. I've gotten rid of all of the stuff in the background. And what I've gone and done is created the flats. Now, the reason I still create flats with the pencil tool, and I use this kind of very simple technique where what we do is separate out. So just kind of show you what I've done just briefly. So normally what I'm doing is I'm taking something like the character, and I have these on separate layers. Now I have them on separate layers for a number of reasons. One, it does make it a little bit easier to ink. It means I can erase stuff behind. You know, it just generally makes it a little bit easier to edit. The other thing is it makes this selection process for the flats easier. Now, there's a number of ways you could do the flats. You could just create a new layer underneath your character or whatever, and just kind of create your flats by painting them in. This is, you know, one of the easiest, simplest ways to do it, and probably, honestly, the best way if you're just beginning. If you're really just new to, you know, Photoshop or digital art, just painting it in is super basic from a sort of conceptual point of view. And, you know, one of the things I see in general is that, you know, even though often I probably could pay someone to do my flats as a professional comic book artist and, you know, do this step, I often found that this is both a really good way to kind of key in your hand-eye coordination. So just kind of putting in these flat colors underneath the lines, creating your base flat color layer for each element. And again, there's lots of things you can do if you are using the pencil tool. So again, I'm using the pencil tool, right? Here we've got the brush. So a good sort of thing to do here is to just look at the brush tool in Photoshop, and you've got the brush tool, pencil tool, mixer, brush tool, color replacement tool. So I use these two, the brush tool and the pencil tool. And the difference is very simple. The pencil tool is sort of stylised, right? It has these sharp edges. It's not softened. It's just pixel on pixel, and that makes it really easy to do things like this. If I have the paint bucket tool and I also turn off anti-aliasing there, I can sort of select, and it functions in a very particular way. I think, you know, other programs have different ways of dealing with this particular problem. Procreate, you know, allows you to sort of drag and drop stuff. It's not always 100%, you know, going to give you exact sort of pixel accuracy. I think Photoshop is a little bit better if you understand how to use the tools, but Procreate is a lot easier to understand, and the results are perfect, right? Similarly, I think there's things with Clip Studio and other programs that automate this process a little bit. But I think that just getting your hand-eye coordination here is really useful, right? You're kind of training your brain to use your Wacom tablet or whatever, and especially if you are using a normal Wacom tablet, not a Cintiq or something like that, this is actually a really good exercise to just kind of really key in your hand-eye coordination. So there's lots of reasons why I think, even though it's boring, doing it the old school way, just sort of painting it in, is really useful. You can also just, you know, paint it with a brush, and right, like even if you don't get this kind of perfect flat thing that's selectable and reselectable, then look, it doesn't matter. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing. But the way I do it is with selection. So I'm going to hit the selection tool, the wand, magic wand, which is W. I'm going to make sure anti-aliasing is turned off. I've got the tolerance set to 10, and I think that'll be sort of pretty good. Sample size is point sample. I'm sampling all layers. And what I do is just collect. I just click, and this particular workstation I think has some setting clicked in a weird spot. So it is very easy for me to move this selection, which is super annoying. But basically what I'm doing is selecting, hold down Shift to plus, add to that selection. I am selecting the white space around the character. And what that's done is it's given me a really good base that I'm going to use to create that initial kind of flat shape from. And I'll show you how that works. So I'm going to hit Q to go into Quick Mask, and that basically visualizes that selection that is being made. The next thing that I do is I use the same pencil tool that I would have if I was flatting, and that I am going to add a lot of the flat colors with. And I'm kind of just making sure that this red sort of paint, right, that is representing sort of ruby lith masking film from the old school sort of paste up days. That's kind of why it's red. And I'm just painting this, which is essentially a mask. I'm painting this with the pencil tool. And again, you could paint the whole thing, or in a similar fashion, I can start using the paint bucket, because I'm creating, right? If we think about, this is often what we have. I've got some lines that are creating this mask, and they're sort of not closed. So if I try and fill in there, pressing G for paint bucket, again, paint bucket also has anti-aliasing off. The wand also has anti-aliasing off. Everything is just basic pencil tool. So if I click in there, it's just going to fill everything, because it sort of escapes this container. If I click in there, right, again, I can create a shape and fill it. So that's the basic idea. I'm using the initial selection to create that like little container. And if I go there, right, you can see again, I've managed to fill it all up. So this is a very particular skill that, I put, a lot of time into kind of perfecting. It's a common technique for selecting things. Yeah, it does make things a lot faster, but in the beginning, just do it however you can. There's a couple of things though that, again, I like to do from a process standpoint, because a big part of what I'm about is efficiency. One of the reasons I can do, so many comic pages a month and color them all, is just all these little tricks that just shave off like a little bit of time here and there. But again, if you're just doing an illustration, it's probably, a lot of this stuff is probably not necessary. But I actually have an action that automates this process. So for me, it's Shift F4. And what this does is it creates a number of things here. So you can see there, right? I've sort of missed a bit in the selection. That doesn't really matter too much. But yeah, that's kind of what we get. And this selection that I've got is very well matched through the lines. And what it means is that if I put this over, something else, if we put a color behind it, right? Doesn't matter what color it is, I'm always going to get like a very clean, good edge. And that also means that, right, this is not pursuant to this tutorial really, but it is also a lot easier to create art with a line and color style using this particular technique, and allow those things to all be on separate layers, and have the colors, have the lines be colored. So there's a lot of reasons why I'm doing it in this particular way, but in most cases, you don't have to worry about it. The key is that I am getting all of those different elements that I drew on separate layers, the foreground, the middle ground, background. I'm selecting them and making sure that they have a flat layer of color behind them. And then I'm basically just clipping the lines to that. And then I'm clipping all the subsequent color between the lines and that sort of first flat layer. So again, I'll show you exactly what's happening there. But that's the technique that I'm using to get there. I do need to make a video about how to do this and put it on YouTube. Again, this is a big part of the Line and Color Academy course that I have. It's all about, as well as building a ritual and a lot of sort of very artistic things, there's a huge variety of, really sort of nerdy Photoshop tricks in there to make things simpler and easier. But yeah, for me, it's like, anything we can do that makes the process more fun, I think is a good thing. So that's basically the the way that we've gone. And this is my first initial set of flat colors. So you can see what I have is all these different elements on their own layer, right? I've got the foreground rocks here, right? Boom, they're on their own layer. I've got the creature, right? It's on its own layer. So you can see, like with this particular illustration, this is not really meant to be animated. It wouldn't animate well because I haven't drawn anything behind. Sometimes, for particular jobs, people do want to have the elements behind, right? So if we take the character out, they would kind of want the creature to be drawn fully, so that you know, if it's animated in some way, right, the cape's flapping in the wind, you know, what's behind it will kind of, you know, fade in and out of view. Again, pretty simple. But yeah, this basically just allows me to do that a little bit easier. Cool. So what I want to do next is talk about the color theory side of it, because I think this is something that's really important. Now, I have, if we look at the thumbnail, all right, not the yellow, crazy, psychedelic one. I'm just going to close that actually. Boom. So it's not chugging up this machine. Right. So if we look at this, it's kind of like all gray. And you can see that there's a lot of stuff here that really is feeling like it should be or could be more rendered than I'm going to make it. I mean, I'm going to stick with that kind of, you know, again, what I define as a classic sort of French clean line style, like Auger with Tintin, or Jean Giraud, Mobius, you know, that kind of where we're really leaning into flat color. Again, you know, a lot of those artists were able to render. There's plenty of, you know, paintings that Mobius did, but you get the idea. I kind of always had the idea that the creature is white or light. I don't know why, but that's kind of the idea that I had. And I'm kind of going with a very basic, simple color scheme. And again, not to keep talking about the courses that I have, but again, one of the other things that I talk a lot about in you know, the courses where I go into detail about color is the concept of having like simple color plan, right? So we want to think about what is there from an environmental point of view, and what is there from a sort of character point of view, like what already exists there. And if I figure out what exists there, then I can create colors that support that, let's say. So start with what I know, and what I know is kind of like in my head, this thing is white. I don't know why, but it is white. And the other thing, which is a little bit more tricky, is that I kind of have in my head that I don't want it to be a sort of warm yellow desert background with a white character, because I've done that a whole bunch of times and I just wanted to do something different, right? So I was like, well, if I make the main character and this creature like fairly bright, fairly white, but I make them warm, then if I make the background cool, then that'll give me a warm, cool contrast. Again, it's quite challenging to have these warm backgrounds because they do kind of tend to pull focus. So super simple color theory. Warm things come forward, cool things recede. The background being cool, right? Blues or just sort of desaturated grays is a little bit easier, right? So I also noticed, you know, I did have this kind of dark sky there. So I'm keeping the sky dark. I'm keeping the rocky kind of environment that he's in, like, you know, sort of granite, right? It's this kind of, and I know granite comes in a lot of colors, but from a color perspective, I always imagine sort of granite being like, you know, sort of slate gray, or let's say slate gray or something like that. That's kind of what I'm imagining. And again, I have this kind of weird color, psychedelic idea of just kind of putting a lot of the underside of the rocks, make them red. Again, that's kind of partly because I've been doing that a lot with one of the comics I've been working with, and I think it sort of looks cool. We'll see how this goes. But the basic idea of how I do this is I kind of just start with everything as a basic color, right? So yes, I have kind of changed these, but all I'm doing initially is kind of just wanting to get a good read, making the stuff in the foreground a little bit darker, stuff in the background a little bit lighter, but I'm going to be using atmosphere to create a lot of that color separation. So the main thing that I have to do now that I've kind of done that background is go along and think about how we deal with the character and stuff. And this is, for me, very much a situation where, look, I'm just making it up as I go along. Let's be frank. I don't really have a solid plan. So what I find is a good way to do that is to just progress with what we know. So what I know is that I want all of these elements that are on top, right? Like the saddle, that is going to be a different color. And I'm imagining it's probably going to be like a reddy, right? Oh, where did we go? Yeah, I imagine it's going to be sort of like a reddy brown or something like that. So I'm not going to try and make things too dark. I'm trying to kind of cap out the darkness. You know, make sure things aren't going into that black. I want to make sure we deal with color contrast, not value contrast. But what I'm doing here is, again, I've got my flats for the creature. And here you can see that same thing with the lines on top. And what I'm doing is creating a layer in between. And this is a really simple way of doing it, and I'll show you why. Or you will find out why as I progress. But this is where, again, you know, I haven't done that basic. I haven't done the basic flatting, but I'm just going to do this. And I want to reiterate how important I think it is to make sure that, yeah, we still do some of this type of work if possible. It would be easy for me to pay someone to do flatting on the comic books, and sometimes I do, but I often find that it is nice to just do it myself. And I always found that. I actually found that doing this type of flatting is one of the best things to do for just kind of chilling out, like watching a movie while you meditatively, you know, or listening to some music, things that, you know, normally are not good for productivity. If you have something really boring to do, look, this is not going to work if you're on a crazy deadline, but I think it does really get you into the zone if you're just doing this sort of, yeah, you just get into the zone of like, I just see colors and I see connections. And there is a speed that you can play with where you do try and create these things faster by thinking about the sequence that you color and flat things. And that in itself can be helpful. But I find that, again, it's kind of like a coloring book, but it's your coloring book, right? You know, people make coloring books for adults these days. And I think it is because there's just something really nice about sitting there, you know, coloring in your thing. So from a meditation standpoint, a catharsis standpoint, I think it is good to not necessarily rush if you don't need to. And I found huge benefit also artistically doing this, where, you know, I really spend a bit of extra time thinking about the image and what works, and I remember all the little bits I put down. And I think that does help me to make better decisions. If I'm pushed to just jump in there, all right, bang, you know, create the, you know, the finished art, I often find I kind of rush a little bit and I don't have this contemplation time. So anyway, that's a lot of sort of, you know, quasi-waffly artist nonsense to say that I think it's still good to do your own flatting. It is also something that if you're beginning, I think this is so important. If you're beginning, and I'm just going to move on to the character now and do some kind of similar things. Yeah, if you're just beginning and just starting out, it's really useful to have some tasks like this that are good for warming up. So what that means is that in the beginning, right at the start of the day, I think it's really good to have one of these things to do, or a couple to do. So I wake up, I'm not really sure what I want to do. Again, you know, maybe if I just jump into drawing, things are going to turn badly, right? I'm not going to be able to, you know, ace it if I just start by doing this type of flatting work, I always found that, you know, by the time I actually got to, oh, I forgot to cut that bit out. Yeah, but by the time I actually got to do, you know, my actual work, I was kind of warmed up, right? I just do this for an hour or so, chill out. Again, you know, it's so easy to waste time fiddling about as an artist. You know, if you're working full time or whatever, and I think just having some of these things where, you know, like, look, I'm just going to go in there, I'm going to go straight away, and I'm going to do this, and, you know, it doesn't matter quite as much if, you know, if we sort of get interrupted or, you know, any of those things. I think it's just a major benefit to have these little tasks here and there. But again, that's just my sort of 2 cents, right? So again, I'm finding some of the colors here, and I'm not really sure what exactly I want to do. I think I'm going to find like a skin tone for this character. That is... So yeah, I'm normally just bouncing around. I'm trying to think about what's going to work, what's not going to work. Now with doing the character flatting like this, I am just doing it all on one layer here, because I don't think it's going to be a huge benefit to put things on a separate layer. But the creature, again, having this thing, the saddle on a separate layer, I think that will help me in the end. And I'll show you some techniques for playing around with both. Boom. 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 So I've got a kind of metallic color here. All these colors are very toned down, right? They're very neutral. I'm trying to create like a bed of neutrality. So still thinking of this character as being kind of red, and this is where I might play with some of the colors as we progress, right? I might think about what goes where. Boom. So yeah, I think trying to create the belt. So just separating out different colors and patterns here. That's basically all I'm doing. And I think I kind of wanted make the wrap there brown. All right, there we go. Got that. Let's make a lighter version for the sharpened blade bit. Again, also very iconic. Oh, there we go. Okay. So again, I'm laying down the bed of neutrality as a start. Yeah, and not sure about the poncho bit. Let's make whatever top he's wearing just sort of a darker neutral. It's all just neutrals. So when I'm playing with neutral, it's more about like, is this warmer? Is it cooler? Right? Are we going up or down the value stack, right? But nothing too crazy. Boom, 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 boom. These things are also metal, I think, as is this thing for simplicity. Again, we'll keep playing, and I kind of want his hair to be the same color as this thing, this creature, to kind of link them a bit. And also because it works from a value perspective. So the key here is that, again, if we look out, we're still dealing very much with neutrals. I'm trying to replicate some of these colors and see whether that sticks, right? Like having these sort of cool reds, these purpley reds involved there somehow. Not sure how much of that will persist. So there's many different ways we could. All right, let's think about this stuff being a bit lighter. But yeah, an easy way to play around with the color, for instance, is to, right, if I want to think about adding color to the cape, I make a new layer above. And I'm just going to flat this by hand. Again, there's a million different ways we could do this. I have some of the selection below that I could potentially use, but often just doing things will make it go really quickly. Boom, boom. Fill that. And a bit over there. Boom. So there we go. We sort of got the red there. Now I feel like something like that is probably what I need to do to really kind of center everything around the main character. And this is really just a matter of using color contrast, not value contrast. Again, I have the warm background, so making this really pop is, I think, a good idea. The question is, what color should it be? So this is where, again, having it on its own little layer, right, is kind of useful. I'm going to hit Control U, and now I'm just going to sort of look at it, right? I'm stepping back, chilling out, and what are we going to do, right? I can change the color of it here, and I can look at it, right, and just kind of see. And for some reason, yeah, I mean, I feel like the pink is like in line with everything else. It makes it very, yeah, I don't know, something like that. Again, I might try that. Again, we can go, I feel like the other option would be like a yellow, right? Like a yellow might work. Light orange, like that. I really like that color, right? That kind of like warm, right? Sort of like warm, boom, like that kind of bright orange is always good, and that would kind of feel a little bit more natural. So again, this is where I sort of zoom out, right? I'm really sort of looking at it like that. Like, is pink better? Is yellow better, right? Like what is good? Now, here's the interesting thing though. I can just duplicate, right? So I can just have two versions of it, right? And it's all fine. Can also just put a little sort of shadow on there. So define what's in shadow, what's not. Again, just using some of those selections. Let's add a bit of that here. Deselect. And yeah, that obviously seems a little bit bright to me, but we could either change the temperature of that to be more cool, right? And then we could also reduce the opacity. And then what you could do is, literally just like merge those down. And then I could, really play with the color some more. Make it a little bit more sort of gray. Again, like just play with things. I I really do think that understanding the, I'm going to select wand. I'm going to turn off contiguous so this selects all the skin color. And again on this, I'm going to go Control H to hide, Control U. And now I'll look at trying to just make that skin a little bit brighter, but also a little bit darker. Boom. Control D to deselect. To do the eyes, I'm going to select the skin color. I'll do this the same for teeth. And I'm just making it brighter until it kind of moves towards that white. So it's just a much lighter version of the skin color, not necessarily bright white. Boom. Yeah, see if we can clean this up around the character. Let's make the ears a little bit lighter. Yeah, boom. Okay. So again, I feel like, look, I'm not 100% sold on the whole thing yet, but I feel like that is like a decent block in at least. And again, we're like, do we want purple? Right? Like, what do we want? Boom, 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 boom. Again, what do we need? Oh, I think Photoshop has bugged out again. There's another bug in Photoshop. This workstation is super buggy. I don't know what its problem is. But yeah, if you're ever here and your thing starts being funny, just go Arrange, New Window, and we will close this thing, and that'll normally sort of get rid of that sort of problem. That's just if your window freezes. Just go Window, New Window, right? Window, Arrange, New Window for this thing, and that'll basically, I've got a shortcut for it, right, that'll create two versions of the same thing there. Boom. Right, nice. So yeah, that's starting to, right, this like starting to come together. It's a little bit weird. It's not exactly what I had in mind. I'm still not sure whether, like, you know, orange or, I feel like orange is a bit safer here with this idea. So yeah, all I really have to do now is I'm going to create some different patterning on the saddle, and then we're going to create some different patterning on the creature itself. And I'm going to do the saddle first. So I've got this layer in between there. We can hit the / key to lock. And that means that, again, I can start to put some different tonalities in here. Now, I'm going to do this really rough, like a bad coloring in job, right? Something that would kind of get you, not good marks at school. I'm going to make this lighter for some reason. That's kind of what I have in mind. But I'm going to sort of keep some of the leather straps as a slightly different color. But as you will see, I'm going to make it a little bit rough. And this will hopefully add a little bit of texture. Hopefully it won't look too bad. Obviously that's a little bit too much with this. Boom, 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 boom. Boom. Alright, let's make these ropes a little bit darker than everything else. And this again is the sort of thing where, like, sometimes I'll just do it quickly because I'm like, look, I'm running out of time. I don't actually have that much to finish this. But if it like really bothers me, I'll just go back and change it later, right? Now, the beauty of this kind of sort of simplicity of style and technique is that, yeah, once I'm kind of here and I've made these decisions, the rest of it is pretty much downhill, right? It's either going to work or not work based on what we've got here. Oh yeah, let's turn contiguous off. Boom. I'm going to delete that. So you can see here I've got got some pretty ugly edges. Maybe I'll just leave that. It's probably not going to be super important. All right. So this makes it pretty simple for me to just go through. I've already locked the outlines. I can be super messy here. And I'm still going to get something that's like pretty decent. Boom. Boom. And I'm using the looseness here to a certain degree to, you know, maybe suggest add some texture. One of the things we could try is putting, let's tone it down a little bit, but yeah, put, boom. All right, put the same color on the creature. Yeah, maybe the tassels. So often when I'm trying to get subtlety, I will just sort of select colors, right? And then I'll reduce the opacity, right? So I've sort of got this scumbling, sort of glazing look going. Same thing here, right? I want sort of different intensity. So we can kind of build up, but they're still flat colors, right? Again, same thing here. I kind of want this to be different color. I want some of this to be in shadow. Right, again, same with some of this. And yeah, I reckon some of these could be different. We could probably play with different colors, right? If I, you know, if we really had time, but yeah, I'm just keeping it super simple. And this just kind of makes all of this stuff sort of blend into the background, right? It makes it non-specific, and just sort of signals to the viewer like, hey, this is not important, right? Don't freak out about this. Don't worry about this. Boom. Okay, so I think we're kind of done with this. Okay. What's going on now? We got this guy. So let's going to make a new layer, and I'm really going to think about, okay, what do we have going here, right? Like what is the general idea? So we could play around with making, right, again, our standard sort of two-tone animalistic look happen here. Something like that. I like the idea of this because it kind of has a bit of like a shark vibe, and it kind of it sort of makes sense of the characters a little bit better, because now we can sort of tell a little bit about sort of what's on top, what's not on top. Boom. Oh, that needs to go back. Yeah, so it can be sort of useful. Again, I'm keeping it pretty. Oh. Let's select, boom, 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 boom. Just the creature. Control H to hide. So I'm not going to go over any of the other stuff. So I guess the question here is like how much of like how much of the character is one color versus another color. I mean, I think this is not terrible. So I just start big, right? Because to a certain degree, you know, a lot of what I do is creating these concept design style images where I'm creating stuff for the first time. And yeah, a big part of that is the thinking process, right? Like what is happening here? So thinking about, you know, like zooming out, right? Like what does that look like? Boom, boom, boom. I think can be kind of useful. Some of them are going to get that exterior, right? Yeah, just playing around. Again, like what I sometimes find, it's really hard to tell whether some of this stuff will matter. Now, what I do have here, I think, is like quite a few different, I've sort of painted into it and over it a bit, which is a mess. Let's get rid of that. Let's clean this up. One last little cleanup. And this, what I'm doing here is really just local color, local value, right? Like what's there, what's important, what's not important. So I think, yeah, we're probably on about, probably just crossed the 3-hour mark on this one. Which is, again, like probably a little bit longer than I was imagining. I reckon I would have been able to get this done quicker if I didn't have to mess around with all that other stuff, you know, with the creature, like redrawing it a bunch of times. But again, you know, it's at the end of the day, it's not that much. So yeah, what I might do is, this is another technique you can use for coloring. So I was going to think about like, okay, could we make, right? Could we make some of these, right? Some of these colors like a little bit like red or something like that. So this is another case where just creating that second layer. Right, and now we're just going to sort of say, all right, anything that's kind of really under there is going to get this kind of tonality. Now, again, this is something I can clean up. This is also like a fully psychoactive, weird sci-fi fantasy thing to do. But yeah, I'm going to change the color here, so this just kind of allows me to see kind of what that might look like. So yeah, again, we can Control U, right? Can think about right exactly what's going on there, and for me, again, like the main thing that I think could be cool is just like, yeah, like that slight tweak that probably is not really even going to be visible, but it just kind of makes it a little bit more kind of fleshy, pasty. Now I'm going to try and clean up around the face. All right, see if we can get this kind of working. Now we could also try and, yeah, no, I don't reckon. I think, well, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Like this is a weird shape and stuff, but I feel like to a certain degree it kind of works, right? Maybe. So yeah, this is another thing you can do, just make another layer, right? new layer. I have shortcuts for making layers and things, so it's just a button, right? Don't take your eye off the actual ball. Boom. Boom, boom, boom. So again, not sure whether this helps, hinders. So it's probably something that if I was designing something to do with comics, I wouldn't do this because it's going to be just extra time, right? But it might be cool. Yeah. Zoop. All right. I think we're done with that. So let's look at what else we could do in terms of getting the atmosphere in there. And then normally what I'll do is I'll just kind of like get most of this there, and then I'll take a break, because that is a really good way to also get some perspective on it. But let's block this in. And the way I'm going to do that is just with super simple gradients. And I've created just sort of layers that are kind of behind and in between each sort of, you know, item, right, layer group. And yeah, now I'm just gonna try and think about what should be there in terms of value, right? Should it be dark? Let's get a big airbrush going, so kind of zoom out. So we're still in that sort of gray area here, which again feels like a little bit of a trap, right? I don't want to get too gray. So often, again, I'll sort of do this in, you know, separate layers. And again, you know, I can try and make the, you know, what's there a little bit more interesting later on. Let's think about, you know, just maybe putting a simple gradient up this character, right? So this is building on the idea that we have a darker character, going back to the thumbnail, like darker subject. Boom. Against a lighter background as a contrast. Boom. And here I've got a layer that's kind of just behind the character. So again, this looks a bit weird, but I'm kind of hoping, right, maybe if I just, right, kind of separate out the character a bit, that'll give us a bit of extra pop on the character. Now, if this creature kind of blends into the background, that's okay with me. That is okay with me. That's not necessarily the worst thing. This is a very silly design, a very silly sort of simple image, and I think kind of, you know, fading it out and giving it a naturalistic look, like, oh yeah, this thing's just there. Right, it's not really jumping out at us. There's a feeling of like, if I can get this thing to feel like it's kind of built from these rocks, then it'll be a little bit more exciting. And I'm really going to try and play with this idea of, again, this is me just thinking aloud, right? But, you know, I really like the idea of, like, yes, there are some of these rocks in the background, but what we're mostly playing with is the idea of these silhouettes against each other. All right, so I put some stuff in front of the character. Now we could also, and I did have some stuff with the character there. All right, I can actually also, with this particular technique, I can clip something to the character. And again, this is all super nerdy Photoshop stuff, but the way this layer stack is set up, I can click something above the lines on that stack here. And that means it's only going to fade out stuff on that line. And that allows me to just grade like get the characters and different elements on these layers to kind of blend into each other. It's often this really subtle stuff that gives it that extra 2 or 3%, right, that you really need to make it look high end. All right, so there we go. Again, just creating the base. So this is like the sort of the base grade, right? Like, does this image work, right? Is this any good? And as I said earlier on, right, just being able to separate out these elements from the foreground, right? So I got foreground, right? Just being able to kind of push them is going to help a lot with the depth. But yeah, so that's like a pretty, that's like a pretty good initial block in. And yeah, the things that I normally like to do after that are just, literally where I would drag and drop sort of textural elements that I have onto the page, and then think about sort of color grading and all those bits and pieces. So again, that's what I might do now. I'll go get a few of those textural elements and we'll sort of put them on, and again, that should give us a pretty good indication of how the final grade is going to look. But at the moment it's looking a little bit desaturated, a little bit kind of meh. But again, that's okay at this point. Okay, so here's where, again, you can start to make things even more efficient. And I've, explained how I added a lot of this textual stuff when I did this sort of Lion Rider version of the art ritual. So if you haven't checked that out, check that out. That is also on the channel, this image from start to finish. And here, what I'm going to talk about is like, what was this one? Yeah, it's the same size. So I can just literally drag and drop this texture on top. And the other thing is, once you create a whole bunch of stuff, right? In this image we had like quite a few different, let's see what we got, quite a few, yeah, different kind of blurry lines and things. So I can probably, like, I'm just wondering how much of this I can drag and drop. I'll grab that, and I'll grab that, and I'll drag that on top as well. So you can see, like, look, it's not really sort of working. But what I can do is maybe just think about what is working, or I can add these things myself, right? So thinking about the dust particles, again, similar kind of tonality, but if something I drag kind of works, then yeah, it works. If I need to create something different, then I need to create something different. But these are things that these days I'm kind of just adding all of these as a stylistic sort of bent. It gives everything like a pretty unique sort of textural look. And I'm going to select some sort of a few dark ones and light ones, right? And that means we have, some texture in the light areas that's dark, and some texture in the dark areas that's light. And again, we're just kind of pulling stuff down. Now, again, this is not the final grade because this is looking super low key, but it might work. And now we got these things. Now this is where, again, what I can do is Control U. Right, let's change these to be more of a blue, or we could even try and make them like a similar red. I don't know whether that's going to work. The other thing you can do is literally just lock / and let's fill them, right? Let's fill it with some tonality. And now I'm going to go, normally I have this on a thing, it's on a, normally I have this on a, sorry, I was just checking whether I was recording. That often happens. Normally I have this on a keyboard shortcut key, warp, right? Let's warp this a slightly different way. And the key here is like just, once you kind of understand this process, you understand that, yeah, you can get stuff happening really quickly, right? You can really quickly add some sort of cool effects, right? Let's put this sort of over here, and, just sort of dragging and dropping. I'm going to put my stuff up there. And yeah, boom, boom. And then I had this one, right? And again, if we just lock that, I'm gonna fill it. It's got the same stuff in it now. Let's unlock it. Let's move it around. You can see it's like much more subtle now. Right, boom. Again, little textural components. See if we can add some extra bits and pieces. Again, just it's funny because I keep trying to basically make this more interesting than it can be, right? It's just like a standard character design image, right? But yeah, that's the basic idea. So other things that I could add is, again, I think I have a signature from here. Boom. Let's put that over there. And here's another thing that sometimes I'll play with. Here's the texture that I often put on from the Star Atlas core pages. Boom. So this will give us a really textury look. I know this will also completely make chaos with the oh, that's got texture on it as well, so I probably don't need those. Let's just reduce the opacity of that. Reduce the opacity of that. Yeah, and there we go. So again, just playing around with different textural sort of elements. Now, also important to understand that look, all of this stuff that's kind of on top here, it's not really gonna, make the image go anywhere. So, like, it's still pretty dull, right? So we can very much play with the idea of gradients, or let's select the creature, and I'm going to select the character, and then I'm going to think about, boom, maybe just adjusting the color a bit. Mostly just to kind of warm things up. Is that on overlay? Yeah, let's. So again, we could play around with something like that. Let's go hide. Now this is a bit extreme, right? But you see that, this kind of idea is really going to let the character come forward. So again, we can play with the tonality here. Again, it's making it a little bit more psychedelic. So at some point, I just start kind of playing with stuff, right? Like it's not really important that it, is necessarily realistic or anything like that. Again, you can play with making. Actually, what I'll do is I've got this. I'm going to add that as a mask. That'll just make my life a little bit easier later on. Boom. So again, we can play around with, adding a bit of drama overall to the image. I feel like we could increase the contrast and maybe sort of pull that in a few different areas, right? Think about, again, yeah, maybe pull the contrast there. Let's make another levels. Maybe just pull the lights up. Let's do select color range. See if we can get the character. Yeah, well, I think that kind of works here. I don't know whether don't know whether it works down here. But you can see, yeah, just sort of color grading, playing around. I think we can play with levels just in general, now that I feel like things are a little bit better separated, right? Now you can also, like, a good thing that I sometimes like to do is view proof setup. Where are we? Let's do custom, and let's just basically simulate simulate paper color. This is a really good thing to do if you're trying to play around with printing, and if your image turns to complete mush at this point, then that's a good sign that, you know, you don't have a good sort of color contrast or anything like that. But you can see here again, I'm kind of just messing around, right? Like really, not a lot of logic here. In terms of, you know, is the grass green? Is the grass blue? Right? Like what is happening? And again, you know, sometimes I care about this stuff, sometimes I don't. We're just trying to create a little bit of rhythm within the image. And yeah, this is normally how I'm going to do it. I'm going to step back a little bit. I think something also that I'm noticing is I feel like we could really try and yeah, just make that full screen. See if I can, let's grab like one of these darker colors. See if we can just homogenize this character in the background into a little bit more of a silhouette. Just because I think that will kind of help. That will kind of help things a little bit. Again, not everywhere, but just in some places, right? Like really make it clear that that's one big mushy thing. Now what you notice is all these sort of marks that I make on top of it have, right, they're a bit much now, right? Like these ones are really popping out. So we'll just take them back. But yeah, just trying to push that back a little bit more. Okay, so if we put our texture back on, you can see, yeah, some of that is working. Oh. But I do think we could add, now that we've got these kind of separations, do you think we can add a little bit more kind of noise and variation to everything? And this is just, you know, trying to, you know, create some textural variation, but it's not based on like just spamming something everywhere, right? I'm putting particular colors, blending them into other colors, and it just increases the visual complexity of what we've got. And I've also got this texture here, right? I'm like, let's see if I can. Right, pull this down. There we go. Yeah. I feel like I like my texture that I had here. I think that's a bit crisper. Put that texture in there. Let's delete these ones. So yeah, lots of like fiddling around at this stage, and I think you know, that's important to understand and appreciate that, you know, you can do this for quite a while. Where did that signature go? It's down there somewhere. There we are. Just going to put that right on the top. Right on the top. There we go. So again, keep assessing, keep thinking about it. Probably one of the things that I think is interesting that could be done is, let's just make these rocks a little bit more varied. Right, think about foreground, right? Like can I create a little bit more value separation? Between that foreground, middle ground, background. Yeah, because I think that will kind of help ground things just a bit. And again, having those separate, elements on, different layers just makes that so much easier. All right, and again, this is probably where I will take a little break, because I think otherwise it's very easy to get a little bit lost. But yeah, I'd kind of really try and create a bit more color separation. And yeah, just mess around, use saturation. Right, like where exactly do we want the color to be? Take it away from the background a little bit. But yeah, it's okay for me if this one's like a little bit vague, right? The concept is, we don't really know what this thing is. We're not quite sure. That's fine. Yeah, they're in some alien landscape. That kind of makes it feel fine even more. But yeah, that's probably where I would leave it for now. Again, I might do a little bit more color tweaking. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, other than that, yeah, this is pretty much, where I'd leave things. Otherwise, I just kind of end up, tweaking and fiddling for hours and hours and hours and hours. So hopefully this has been sort of useful. Again, just seeing one of these processes, how I handle this. And again, in this particular instance, for me, it's been very interesting to see. I really think there was something about this thumbnail where I had a lot of potential for it. I really wanted to make it into something, and there's something wrong with it, right? Maybe it wasn't a good idea, and maybe again, it's talks to the fact that, I need to do more of that design work. I need to think about it earlier on, really kind of nail down that design before I start playing around at this stage, or just adjust my expectation, right, for how long that's going to take. This took longer than I thought it would be to kind of create this type of image. And again, I think that's like an interesting insight, hopefully. But anyway, let me know whether, you've got images that you haven't finished. I have an entire hard drive full, terabytes probably of unfinished junk lying around. Yeah, I think it can be a really good exercise to, as you progress with your skill set, to try and pick those things up, figure out, what was wrong with them, what happened. It offers so much insight into your own process, and I've done that a couple of times, and I found it's really useful and cathartic, and it feels a bit victorious if you kind of succeed, and feels really bad if you don't. Yeah, it's so interesting, and I think it offers a little bit of insight into how our mind works, where the image we have of the image we're wanting to create in our mind is such a major part of how we feel about its success, right? So again, I could have created something out of this. Maybe people would have been like, hey, that's cool, but I'm sitting there going, hey, this is not kind of what I wanted, right? It's not living up to my sort of image of this thing. Yeah, maybe if I get it right, then this image could become something, right? I've created entire comics based off just one little sketch of a character. So it's really important to care, I guess, about these things, to care about how it turns out, to care about the subtle details and the quality, right? That's often what makes all the difference. Training your eye bit by bit, year by year. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Catch you around. Happy drawing.